Chaco Canyon is an archaeological site rich with information. Much of it is still underground. Archaeologists believe that for every one excavated structure, there may be hundreds unexcavated awaiting inspection.
Deep within the sun-baked landscape of the American Southwest lies Chaco Canyon, a place that has both fascinated and puzzled archaeologists for generations. Recent discoveries have shattered our previous understanding of this ancestral pueblo and center.
They marked with a dagger of light their knowledge of the sky, a knowledge they would use to guide their construction of a center of cosmology,
forcing us to completely rewrite its history. What was once thought to be merely a ceremonial site used for occasional rituals has now been revealed as something far more significant.
Recent discoveries reveal an intricate astronomical system here. Clues to Chaco have been held over the centuries in these walls and in the oral histories carried by the descendant people, the Pueblo Indians of today.
A permanent settlement with sophisticated environmental adaptations, complex social structures, and an intricate cosmological landscape. The ancient people who called this harsh terrain home were far more advanced than we ever imagined, and their story is about to change everything we thought we knew.
In our history, they talk of things that occurred a long time ago, of people who had enormous amount of power, spiritual power and power over people. I think those types of people lived here in Chaco.
For decades, the prevailing theory about Chaco Canyon painted a limited picture of its significance. Researchers believe this remarkable site, with its massive stone structures rising from the desert floor, was primarily a ceremonial center rather than a permanent settlement. The conventional wisdom held that the iconic multi-story great houses and elaborate stone masonry were used only occasionally for rituals and gatherings. After all, how could anyone sustain life year-round in such an arid, unforgiving environment? This view seemed reasonable given the challenging landscape. With minimal rainfall, harsh seasonal temperature swings, and limited resources, many archaeologists concluded that Chaco Canyon simply couldn't support a large permanent population. The site's impressive architecture was explained away as evidence of its special ceremonial status, places built for periodic gatherings before people returned to more hospitable locations. It was a nice, tidy explanation, says Dr. James Rodriguez, archaeologist at the University of Arizona, but it wasn't accurate, not even close. Recent research from the University of Cincinnati has decisively challenged this ceremonial center theory. David Lentz, UC professor of biology and lead author of a groundbreaking study published in PLOS One, explains the ancestral Puebloans interacted with the local ecosystem in ways that helped them adapt and thrive for over a millennium. His interdisciplinary team argues that the massive stone and timber infrastructure at Chaco Canyon, built over many centuries, was not simply a periodic ceremonial center and storage facility. Our evidence contradicts many of the currently proposed theories about the occupation of Chaco Canyon in ancient times. This revelation didn't come from a single dramatic discovery, but rather through the patient application of multiple scientific approaches. By combining pollen and botanical analysis with advanced LiDAR mapping technology, researchers have uncovered compelling evidence of continuous habitation and sophisticated ecosystem management. This interdisciplinary approach, bringing together experts in biology, anthropology, geology, and geography, has revealed the economic and environmental footprint left by ancestral Puebloans during their cultural prime. The implications are profound. Chaco Canyon wasn't just a place where people occasionally gathered, it was a thriving community where people lived, worked, farmed, traded, and built a complex society. They didn't just visit this challenging landscape, they made it their home and developed ingenious ways to survive and even prosper there. We're looking at a complete paradigm shift, notes Dr. Sarah Thompson, archaeologist with the National Park Service. Everything we thought we understood about Chaco needs to be reconsidered. These weren't occasional visitors, these were permanent residents who transformed their environment in remarkable ways. But what exactly led researchers to this dramatic reversal in understanding? The evidence of permanent settlement is both abundant and compelling, hiding in plain sight within the material record of Chaco Canyon. The National Park Service's archaeological collection contains a vast array of artifacts that represent the full spectrum of Chacoan material culture and daily life activities. These aren't merely ceremonial objects, they're the tools and items of everyday living. The collection includes prehistoric vessels for cooking and storage, stone and bone tools for a variety of tasks, practical items like matting and sandals, and ground stone tools specifically designed for making corn flour. There are projectile points for hunting, hammers and mauls for construction, hoes and digging sticks for agriculture, corn cobs and turkey bones from their food supply, and ornaments crafted from shell, turquoise, jet, and bone. What we're seeing isn't consistent with occasional use, explains Dr. Michael Chen, curator at the Chaco Culture National Historical Park. This is the material signature of people living their entire lives here, cooking, eating, building, farming, and creating. The breadth of artifacts tells the story of a complete society, not just visitors. The extensive collection, largely gathered during the Chaco Project 1970 to 1985, represents one of the most comprehensive archaeological research programs ever conducted in North America. This systematic investigation identified nearly 4,000 sites within the canyon and surrounding areas, with approximately 2/3 dating to prehistoric times. The methodical collection of over 100,000 artifacts from nearly 1,800 sites provides an unparalleled window into Chacoan culture and daily life. What's particularly revealing is the distribution of these artifacts. They aren't concentrated solely around the impressive great houses or kivas where ceremonies would have been held. Instead, they're scattered throughout the landscape in patterns consistent with residential use, work areas, and community spaces. The artifacts show signs of heavy use, repair, and adaptation, hallmarks of items that served practical purposes in daily life, not ceremonial objects used occasionally and then carefully stored away. The presence of middens, ancient trash deposits, further supports the permanent settlement theory. These middens contain layer upon layer of household waste, food remains, broken tools, and discarded items that accumulated over centuries of continuous occupation. The stratification within these deposits allows archaeologists to trace changes in diet, technology, and resource use through time, painting a picture of a dynamic, evolving community rather than a static ceremonial site. Perhaps most telling are the residential structures themselves. While the great houses get most of the attention, Chaco Canyon contains hundreds of smaller residential structures where ordinary people lived their daily lives. These more modest dwellings show evidence of multiple renovations, expansions, and adaptations over time, exactly what you'd expect from permanently occupied homes that needed to meet the changing needs of families across generations. The residential areas tell us something crucial, notes Dr. Thompson. These weren't temporary shelters, they were homes built with the same care and attention to detail as the great houses, just on a smaller scale. People invested in these structures because they planned to live in them for their entire lives, and then pass them on to their children. Detailed analysis of construction methods reveals that many buildings were built in stages over decades or even centuries, with newer sections added as families grew or community needs changed. This long-term investment in architecture strongly suggests a population that was firmly rooted in place, not one that viewed Chaco Canyon as merely a ceremonial destination. Living permanently in Chaco Canyon's challenging environment required remarkable adaptation skills, but it also left a significant human footprint on the landscape. One of the most significant recent discoveries concerns the environmental impact of ancestral Puebloan occupation and their adaptive responses to changing ecological conditions. Research published in 2021 revealed that the ancient inhabitants of Chaco Canyon substantially altered their surrounding ecosystem through resource extraction, particularly of woodland resources. This wasn't careless exploitation, but rather a careful management of resources that allowed them to sustain their community for centuries, though not without consequences. They were essentially environmental engineers, explains Dr. Elena Martinez, paleoecologist at the University of New Mexico. They transformed their surroundings to meet their needs while developing strategies to cope with the changes they created. It was a complex relationship with the land. Evidence shows that the ancestral Puebloans harvested timber and fuel from both distant forests and local woodlands, with a particular focus on juniper and pinyon pine. These resources weren't merely conveniences, they were essential components of their resource base from late Archaic times 3000 to 100 BC through the Bonito phase AD 800 to 1140, which marked the height of Chacoan cultural development. Pollen and macrobotanical analysis from soil samples has provided a detailed picture of how the landscape changed over time. The data indicates that Chaco Canyon's woodlands were substantially impacted during late Archaic to Basket Maker 2 times, 100 BC AD 500, a period that coincided with the transition to agricultural food production and the introduction of pottery manufacturing in the canyon. By the time of the Bonito phase, when they were constructing those impressive architectural structures, the local woodlands, especially the juniper component, had been decimated by centuries of continuous extraction, notes Dr. Lentz. This wasn't a sudden crisis, but a gradual transformation of their environment. The macrobotanical record recovered from excavations includes charcoal remains of 1C juniper, sumac, pinyon pine, cottonwood, willow, and elderberry, providing direct evidence of which wood resources were being utilized. This pattern of resource use demonstrates both the ancestral Puebloans' intimate knowledge of local ecology and the environmental consequences of their sustained habitation. But what makes the Chacoan story remarkable isn't just that they altered their environment, it's how they adapted to these changes. As local wood resources became scarcer, they developed new strategies. They began importing timber from forests up to 50 miles away, creating an impressive logistical network for resource acquisition. They also modified their architectural designs to use less wood while maintaining structural integrity. Water management represents another area of ingenious adaptation. In an environment receiving less than 9 inches of rainfall annually, the ancestral Puebloans created sophisticated systems to capture, store, and distribute this precious resource. They built check dams and terraces to slow water runoff and prevent soil erosion. They constructed reservoirs to capture seasonal rainfall and engineered canals to direct water to agricultural fields. Their water management systems were remarkably sophisticated, says Dr. Thompson. They understood the hydrology of the canyon and designed infrastructure that maximized the efficiency of every drop of rain. It's the kind of environmental engineering that demonstrates deep knowledge accumulated over generations. Analysis of soil samples has revealed that they also enriched their agricultural fields with nutrients from household waste and ash, creating more productive growing conditions in the desert soil. This practice allowed them to maintain agricultural productivity even as population density increased. For any permanent settlement to thrive, a stable food supply is essential. In Chaco Canyon's arid environment, developing successful agricultural practices was perhaps the most crucial adaptation the ancestral Puebloans needed to master. The archaeological record clearly shows they did just that, developing a sophisticated agricultural system that could support a substantial population despite the challenging conditions. During the Bonito phase, AD 800 to 1130, Chaco Canyon became a center of social complexity featuring a hierarchical society, intensive hydraulic agriculture, ceremonial activities, and the maintenance of distant trade routes. But how exactly did they manage to farm in a place that receives less than 9 inches of rainfall annually with a growing season limited by elevation and temperature extremes? The answer lies in their agricultural innovations, which combine technological ingenuity with a deep understanding of the local environment. The presence of agricultural implements such as hoes and digging sticks in the archaeological collection, along with corn cobs and grinding tools, confirms that farming was a central activity, not something pursued casually by occasional visitors. They weren't just opportunistic farmers, explains Dr. Rodriguez. They were agricultural specialists who developed techniques specifically adapted to this challenging environment. One key innovation was their approach to field placement. Rather than attempting to farm the entire canyon floor, they carefully selected locations that would receive runoff water from the surrounding mesas. By positioning their fields at the mouths of small side canyons or along the paths of seasonal water flows, they maximized the effective moisture available to their crops without relying solely on rainfall. They enhanced these natural advantages with constructed features. Archaeological surveys have identified numerous check dams, terraces, and grid gardens throughout the canyon. These structures served multiple purposes, slowing water runoff to allow more time for infiltration, trapping nutrient-rich sediments, and creating level planting surfaces that retained moisture more effectively. It's really a form of micro-environmental engineering, notes Dr. Martinez. They weren't trying to transform the entire canyon. They were creating optimized growing conditions in specific locations. The ancestral Puebloans also practiced a sophisticated form of crop selection and diversification. Analysis of plant remains shows they primarily grew drought-resistant varieties of corn, maize, beans, and squash, the famous three sisters that formed the backbone of many Native American agricultural systems. These crops were complementary, with beans fixing nitrogen in the soil, corn providing support for bean vines to climb, and squash spreading over the ground to suppress weeds and retain soil moisture. But they didn't rely solely on these staples. Archaeological evidence indicates they also cultivated or harvested amaranth, chenopod, sunflowers, and various wild plants, creating a diversified food system that provided nutritional balance and insurance against crop failures. Perhaps most impressively, they developed agricultural techniques that enhanced soil fertility rather than depleting it. Analysis of ancient field soils shows evidence of deliberate amendments, including household waste, ash from cooking fires, and organic matter that would have improved the soil's ability to retain moisture and nutrients. Beyond the practical aspects of daily life and survival, recent discoveries have revealed another dimension of Chaco Canyon that redefines our understanding of its significance. A sacred landscape of remarkable complexity and cosmic significance. Perhaps the most visually striking recent discovery comes from LiDAR, light detection and ranging technology, which has revealed an elaborate road system near Chaco Canyon that appears to have had profound ceremonial and cosmological significance. This network of engineered pathways extends far beyond what would be necessary for mere transportation, suggesting a landscape imbued with symbolic meaning and ritual purpose. In early 2025, researchers announced the discovery of a 1,000-year-old sacred road system at the Gasco site, approximately 50 miles south of Chaco Canyon. Using LiDAR technology, which employs laser pulses to reveal landscapes hidden beneath vegetation, archaeologists determined that a previously known road at the site was almost 4 miles long, rather than just a few hundred feet as previously thought. Even more significantly, they identified a second, previously unknown road running approximately 115 feet to the south of the first road. One of the really exciting things about the work we've been doing with Chaco roads is that they're forcing us to reconceptualize what a road might be, what a road might mean, explained Robert Weiner, an archaeologist at Dartmouth College who led the study. These findings were confirmed through fieldwork conducted in 2021 and 2022. What makes these roads particularly significant is their alignment with celestial events. Both roads align with the winter solstice sunrise over Mount Taylor, which remains a sacred mountain among indigenous peoples today. This alignment suggests that the roads were not merely transportation routes, but integral components of a ritual landscape that connected the physical world with the cosmic order. These weren't just paths to get from point A to point B, notes Dr. Rodriguez. They were physical manifestations of a worldview that saw connections between earth and sky, between human communities and celestial forces. They literally built their cosmology into the landscape. The monumental nature of these constructions further supports their ceremonial purpose. Chaco roads were typically cut directly into the sandstone bedrock and reached widths of approximately 30 feet. This is far wider than would be necessary for practical transportation, especially given the absence of wheeled vehicles or pack animals in pre-Columbian North America. Instead, these broad avenues likely served as pathways for ceremonial processions and rituals. The research team also discovered an additional herradura, the remains of a horseshoe-shaped wall of rocks that may have functioned as a roadside shrine. This finding further emphasizes the sacred nature of these pathways and their importance in ancestral Puebloan ritual practice. But the sacred landscape extends beyond the road system. The great houses themselves, with their careful astronomical alignments, represent another dimension of this cosmological ordering of space. Multiple studies have documented how these massive structures were oriented to track solar and lunar cycles, with windows and doorways positioned to capture specific celestial events throughout the year. The architecture served as a kind of calendar, explains Dr. Chen. Certain rooms would be illuminated by the sunrise on solstices or equinoxes, or by moonlight at significant points in the lunar cycle. They were literally building astronomy into their homes and ceremonial spaces. Recent computer modeling of these alignments has revealed an even more sophisticated astronomical knowledge than previously recognized. The great houses weren't aligned to just one or two celestial events, but appear to track multiple astronomical phenomena with remarkable precision. This suggests a society with specialized knowledge keepers who maintained and expanded astronomical understanding over many generations. The discovery of geometric patterns in the layout of Chacoan buildings adds another layer to our understanding of this sacred landscape. Researchers have identified repeating ratios and geometric relationships between structures that wouldn't be immediately apparent from ground level but create an overarching order when viewed from above or understood mathematically. There's an elegance to the way they organize space, notes Dr. Thompson. These aren't random placements but a carefully conceived system that reflects mathematical and cosmological principles. The most visible testament to Chacoan achievement remains the massive great houses that still dominate the canyon landscape after nearly 1,000 years. These architectural marvels stand not just as impressive monuments, but as physical evidence of a society with remarkable organizational capabilities, specialized knowledge, and substantial resources, all hallmarks of a permanent, complex community rather than occasional visitors. The scale of these structures is truly impressive. Pueblo Bonito, the largest and best-known great house, contained over 600 rooms and rose 4 stories high in places. Its D-shaped design enclosed a central plaza with several kivas ceremonial chambers, and at its peak, it may have covered nearly 3 acres. The masonry walls were massive, sometimes more than 3 feet thick at the base, and constructed with remarkable precision. What makes these buildings so significant isn't just their size, explains Dr. Rodriguez. It's the level of planning, engineering knowledge, and coordinated labor they represent. These weren't improvised structures, they were carefully designed and executed over multiple generations. Recent architectural analysis has revealed sophisticated construction techniques that ensured the durability of these massive buildings. The ancestral Puebloans didn't simply stack stones, they created walls with rubble cores faced with carefully shaped sandstone blocks, a technique that provided both strength and insulation. They incorporated wooden beams at regular intervals to distribute structural loads, and they designed roof systems that could support multiple stories while providing living spaces with adequate headroom. Perhaps most impressive is their mastery of site engineering. The great houses were positioned and oriented with careful attention to drainage, sun exposure, and protection from prevailing winds. Foundation trenches were dug and filled with stronger materials to support the massive weight of multi-story structures. Room layouts were designed to provide natural lighting and ventilation while maintaining structural integrity. These weren't trial-and-error builders, notes Dr. Chen. The evidence shows they understood principles of engineering, materials science, and environmental design. They were applying sophisticated knowledge accumulated over many generations. The timber elements of these structures reveal another dimension of Chacoan organization and planning. Dendrochronological studies, tree ring dating, have shown that most of the massive roof beams came from trees harvested in mountain ranges 50 to 60 miles away. These beams, some weighing hundreds of pounds, had to be cut, stripped, and transported entirely by human labor over challenging terrain. Some great houses contain thousands of such beams, representing an enormous investment of resources and coordinated effort. What's particularly telling about the architecture is its evidence of continuous occupation and adaptation. The great houses weren't built all at once, but expanded and modified over centuries. Walls were added, doorways sealed and reopened, rooms subdivided or combined, and new stories added on top of existing ones. This pattern of ongoing modification is consistent with buildings that were continuously occupied and adapted to meet changing needs rather than structures built for occasional ceremonial use. The ancestral Puebloans of Chaco Canyon didn't live in isolation. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence for Chaco's importance as a permanent settlement comes from the extensive trade networks they established and maintained across the American Southwest and beyond. These connections reveal a society with diplomatic skills, economic savvy, and cultural influence, all characteristics of a central place in a broader regional system rather than an occasionally visited ceremonial site. Archaeological findings demonstrate that Chaco Canyon was at the center of extensive trade networks reaching hundreds of miles in all directions. The presence of exotic materials in the artifact collection provides concrete evidence of these far-flung connections. Turquoise from mines in southern New Mexico and central Colorado, marine shells from the Pacific coast and the Gulf of California, copper bells from western Mexico, macaws and cacao from tropical regions far to the south. These items traveled hundreds of miles to reach Chaco Canyon. The diversity of trade goods is remarkable, explains Dr. Martinez. These weren't just random items that happened to find their way to Chaco. They represent deliberate, sustained trade relationships that persisted over centuries. What's particularly significant is how these exotic materials were distributed and used within Chacoan society. They weren't simply curiosities, but were incorporated into items of ritual and social significance, jewelry, ceremonial objects, and status markers that help define social roles and relationships. The concentration of these valuable materials in certain great houses and burial contexts suggests a society with social stratification and specialized roles. Again, characteristics of a permanent settlement rather than a temporary gathering place. The trade networks weren't limited to physical objects. There's evidence for the exchange of ideas, techniques, and cultural practices as well. Architectural influences from Mesoamerican cultures can be seen in some Chacoan building designs. Pottery styles show both local innovation and adaptation of motifs from neighboring regions. Agricultural techniques appear to have been shared and modified to suit local conditions. Chaco was a crossroads not just for goods, but for knowledge, notes Dr. Thompson. They were connected to a much larger world of ideas and innovations.